Hey there, friends. I hope that you enjoy this episode of the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast as much as I enjoyed making it. I want to take a moment here at the beginning to extend a special offer, an invitation to you, our dear listeners, to join the Remembering course. Our next start date is going to be in middle of March. This is a powerful, deeply moving, and for many people, transformational experience into the heart of colonization, climate change, family histories, ancestors, and so many other critical intersecting pieces. Just visit our website, Sequoia Samanvaya. All the information is in the link below.
Hello, and welcome to the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast. My name is Sarah Jolena Wolcott, and I am your hostess on this sacred learning journey of unraveling, unveiling, and becoming more fully alive at the end of the world as we know it. In this podcast, we offer up to you, dear listener, 3 forms of episodes to support your journey of remembering and reenchanting. First, conversations with amazing people. Second, storytelling. And third, myth casting. In this episode, we're going to bring you a conversation between myself another amazing, fascinating leader in the areas of remembering and reenchanting.
Today, I had the delight to speak with Heather Wolf, whom I met just over a year ago when both of us were participating in the Heal Story podcast developed by our mutual friend, Daniel Roth. I had the pleasure of visiting Heather in her home on a small island in the Salish Sea, not far from current-day Seattle, very close to the summer solstice this past summer. So it is particularly delightful to talk to her today, very close to winter solstice. Heather, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to share a little bit about Heather before we get started today. Heather Wolf is an herbal brewess, folk herbalist, teacher, singer, and performing artist from an island in the Salish Sea. Her work is devoted to reviving folk wisdom traditions and a remembrance of our ancestral heritage and sacred relationships. With decades of study and craft of herbal brewing traditions, Heather most recently launched the Brewess Underground, a private brew club centering on dry, herbal, and botanical honey liqueurs, released on the Equinoxes and Solstices. She started brewing at age 18 during an undergraduate study of cultural anthropology, mythology, epistemology of plant knowledge at Evergreen State College. During that time, she created an independent study on the ancient and sacred origins of fermented alcoholic drinks when she was a residential intern at Heron Botanicals, an herbal farm and herbal medicine company. Her herbal brews, including honey-kombuchas, have been much beloved throughout the American Northwest. In addition to brewing, she is relearning her own Sephardic Jewish and British Isles ancestral songlines and partaking in the revitalization of folk traditions. She writes of folk traditions of folk wisdom is carried by the collective, belongs to the whole, is the vital foundation of every healthy culture. These arts relate us directly with our own beings, each other, and the sacred world from which our existence is emergent and interdependent. Now, the reason I was visiting Heather last summer was in large part to support her in the private launch of her new creation, the Brewess Underground, at the first release soiree of her herbal meads. As part of that celebration, my partner and I initiated a circular calendar ritual wherein participants become what we refer to as time walkers, walking back in time. We used her mead brew as part of this. Not only was that an amazing moment for all of us participating, but it was the first time that I had considered the relationship between fermentation and circular time. I am delighted to be having this conversation with Heather, and we'll be delving into all of these topics. But first, before we start the talking part of this conversation, I am hoping, Heather, that it would be possible for us to start with a song.
Yes. Let's start with a very simple chant, which you're welcome to join me. Spiraling in, time disappears. Spiraling mind, unwind time. Spiraling in, time disappears. Spiraling mind, unwind time. Spiraling in, time disappears. Spiraling mind,
Spiraling mind,
unwind time.
unwind time,
Spiraling mind,
spiraling mind,
unwind time.
unwind time.
Yeah.
Can you say something about how brewing enables us to unwind time and to spiral in?
Yes. Well, I think there are many ways to answer that question. But the first that I'll just go straight to is inebriation. When we imbibe an elixir that alters our consciousness, it takes us into a different space. Time changes. And these brews have been used since the beginning of human history of discovering and making herbal alcoholic drinks. Over 10,000 years of this. They were always gifts of the gods, of divine plant spirits, mythical divine beings, and they were gifts in order to help humanity learn, in order to help humanity remember and wake up. And I think one of the most primary things that we've forgotten in today's culture is the sacred element of inebriation, that quality and what it helps us remember.
So remind us, for those of us less familiar, what inebriation means.
Yes, inebriation, to be inebriated is sometimes also called to be intoxicated, but that language has an inference of toxicity and poison. So to be inebriated on nectar, mead is one of the oldest drinks of humanity. And in many cultures around the world, I'll focus on Norse cultures, mead was considered to be a gift of bringing poetry and song into the world. So in the Norse mythology of how mead originated, in the origin story of honey wine, 3 drops of this holy honey wine fell from heaven to earth. And out of those 3 drops that humans drank came all poetry and song. But if you look throughout cultures, the connection between sacred consciousness and creativity, creative expression, and the brews themselves being a vehicle or a medicine for that, is present.
Mm. Mm. And just as a reminder for folks that mead is fermented honey when water, is that correct?
Right. Yes. So mead, honey is to mead as grapes are to wine, as barley is to beer. It's fermented honey wine, mead, and then meads can be added with fruits and can be and can have herbs added. And there's all different kinds of elixirs you can make. But I did want to add to saying this about inebriation or intoxication, like thinking of altering consciousness. It's a powerful thing. It's not to say that we should just all be getting inebriated or altering. It's the connection of herbalism, fermentation, creating alcohol. And truly it's a fermentation that creates an inebriation, not just from the alcohol, but also from the effects of the herbs. It's an alchemy of all of that and the effects of the honey. But it's that within a sacred context. When we actually alter our consciousness within a sacred context, it's very different than when we alter our consciousness in a mundane consciousness. And I think that has everything to do with time. I think it has everything to do with our relationship with time and timelessness.
So my experience of experiencing your elixirs is that you're absolutely correct. And I have to say that for me, one of the things that was really striking is that I come from a background that does not we are not people who like alcohol. We are not people who particularly approve of alcohol. I have many alcoholics in my family. I have known many people to die of alcohol and related diseases. So I actually, if I would say, if anything, I certainly when I was younger, I have a bit less of this. I have much less of this now, but certainly when I was younger, I have a certain an almost inherent distrust of alcohol. And I think many others, I'm sure, have similar experiences. So I want us to kind of just take a moment to take apart before we kind of delve into like the sacred time part of it, to just talk a little bit what's actually happening with fermentation, because I feel like people like me, I've learned a lot through actually kind of unpacking what's actually going on. So maybe you can take us through the process of fermenting, starting with your before you go to collect a plant.
Yes.
Because this really is about a relationship to the earth and your relationship to plants. So take us through, like, how do you even approach a plant that you might want to bring into a process of alchemy through fermentation?
Yes, I would love to. If you don't mind, I want to quickly touch on the alcoholism component
please,
too.
yeah.
I want to say that when I say that, that there is an important role and place for inebriation and altering our consciousness as being human. I say that with caution, and I hold just as closely the reality of the rampant alcoholism in our culture and world, that I think it's one of the most socially accepted forms of addiction, and it's perhaps one of the most prevalent forms of addiction culturally. And the mistrust of alcohol, I think, is very legitimate. And what I want to say is that it comes, in my feeling, it comes from the mythology and the worldview by which we hold alcohol itself, where we have so deeply forgotten alcohol as a power, a sacred power. There's a reason we call them spirits. And therefore, if we're not in sacred relationship with something that is sacred and powerful, we're very easily going to be causing harm with it. So a big motivation for me with Brewess is to reestablish a sacred relationship with alcohol and a sacred relationship with inebriation, the how. So I just wanted to add that. But in terms of the process, so the process of fermentation is quite simple and quite complex. The simplicity of it is that it happens constantly in nature all the time. The air we breathe is full of bacteria and yeasts. Bacteria and yeasts grow on the skins of fruits and vegetables. And, I co-founded a kombucha and sauerkraut company before this. And kombucha is a specific culture of yeast and bacteria. But sauerkraut is a spontaneous ferment from the lactobacillus bacterias, probiotics that grow on the skins of the vegetables and in the vegetables. So what I love about fermentation, and especially working with herbal brewing, is humans are they're culturing what already wants to exist. It's coming into relationship with a living world. And it's culturing the cultures that we want. It's influencing a brew. So for example, in the process that I go through, I like to create a sacred intention of when I'm going to create a brew, whether it's in honor of the solstice or equinox, springtime or winter, or whether it's sometimes it's been, I want to make a brew that's going to give my sister what I feel she needs. And then I know it will also be beneficial to all women, or to many women, or many humans, really, the feminine in humans. So I would pick the herbs or gather the herbs, and the honey is very important. I can talk a lot about honey, but I'll wait for that for later. And then you have a choice to work with the naturally occurring yeasts and bacteria in the honey if you keep it raw, and on the herbs in the plants and fruits if you also keep them raw, because there are wild yeasts everywhere and bacteria. So, or you can inoculate it with a cultivated yeast that you like. Yeah.
So let's just pause here. You said this very powerful phrase, culturing the cultures. So yeast is culture.
It's a culture.
It is a culture.
It's
And now,
it's a whole
as a
of cultures.
I'm feeling almost like I'm feeling the extent of my non-biologist part of me. I'm like imagining all these little yeasty beasties like going around talking to each other, and creating like their own language. So when we say yeast is a culture, what do we mean by that?
Well, fungus, a yeast is a fungus, and the fungal kingdom is its own kingdom. We have the plant kingdom, right? The animal kingdom and the fungal kingdom. I mean, in fact, yeast and bacterias, fungus and bacterias are our ancestors, our oldest, most ancient ancestors. We emerge out of yeasts, the primordial yeast bacterial soup, and we are still 9/10 non-human cells. We're still 9/10 yeast and bacteria. So that's why we talk
a huge
so much.
Kingdom. Like I know there's a lot of.
It's a huge kingdom, which is why wild fermentation, which is what is so why it's so exciting and challenging, because you are taking a whole array of microbes that are in nature or on a plant or on in honey, and you are working on cultivating the specific flavor profile, the results that you want. I mean, what is the difference between fermentation and rotting? It's very,
very close.
Some of the best, finest cheeses, some might find, others might call rotten, right? But it's like that with a good sourdough culture. It's the same thing. It's why bakeries that have established a good culture of the sourdough yeast they like, it's cultured onto the walls of their very bakery. So they're not like, there's a bakery in San Francisco, it's very famous. And when they moved to a new bakery, they actually scraped the walls of their bakery and painted the yeast cultures onto the new bakery, because it had established itself with the flavor profile and the aroma and the response of fermentation that was supreme. And so it's similar in brewing, in old traditions of brewing. In Norway, they would use these logs or staffs that would go into the beer and then would get inoculated with the culture, would dry out and become dormant. And then every time they brewed, it would go back in and become activated again. So the log itself was holding a culture. And Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the most popular strain of yeast used to create alcohol, is naturally occurring on oak. So it really is it's coming into relationship with nature, with the living world. And it's a science, but it's a very sensual science.
And are there different yeasts that you would use for different creations for mead?
Yeah, there are different strains. It's brewers covet and often keep secret what strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae they like to use, because they carry different flavor profiles. There's also sour ferments, which I really love, which have different bacterias and yeasts combined in the brews.
So then you're pulling together the herb, which has its own properties, and the yeast, which has its own properties, and the honey, which has its own properties, and the water of a particular place, which have its own properties. Is that correct? Am I getting that right? So these four dynamics, the water, the yeast, which is from the microbe kingdom, the insect kingdom with the honey, and the plant kingdom with the herbs. So you have these three different kingdoms and a element kind of combining each other, coming together. And tell me, like, as you're putting these different dynamics together, it feels like a deeply, like a process of enchanting.
Definitely. Yeah. In the best moments, I feel that I'm holding space for what wants to be created. And I do feel, that there are, having worked with plants now for over 20 years, and doing a lot of wild crafting and growing of my own herbs, so working with the fresh living plant, I feel without a doubt that plants have spirits and communicate with spiritually. I feel that life is sacred. I don't know that I fully answered your question.
Well, I was just thinking, leaning into the enchantment aspect of it. Do you say prayers over these?
Yeah, sometimes I do. Yeah, it's funny. It's interesting. Sometimes I sing. There are different traditions around the world. Some cultures would be very peaceful and gentle and soft with the brews, and some would want to yell at the brew and bang loud pots and make really loud noises. So there's many ways. And of course, there's many ways of expressing many languages. But I like to create an altar space. And I like to remember why I'm doing this. And I like to remember that the spirits are that I'm serving the well-being and the flourishing of the spirits, because I trust these beings with the wisdom that they carry, and I feel that they have a gift for us to receive. So, but they also have a power. So if I become unconscious, or if I forget why I'm doing this, that can have an effect. So want to make sure I set the intention clearly, because humans have a tendency towards forgetfulness.
Oh, we certainly do. So I had this beautiful, vivid image in my mind of these three kingdoms in the element coming together into a jar that is placed on your altar with a certain amount of reverence and respect for the inherent knowledge that is within these different kingdoms and elements, and that it then subsequently goes through a process, its own unique process of blending and intermingling for a period of time. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then during that, and that kind of takes us to this question of time. So tell us a little bit, like maybe we can lean into and just open the door for how is it that time's interfacing and with the creation of the brew.
Well, what's happening in the time span is an alchemy. So the sugars, the available sugars of the honey, or whatever it would be, the sweet source, the grape, the malted barley, is being eaten by the yeasts, which produce more of themselves and then begin to produce alcohol, CO2, and different nutrients, proteins, B vitamins, and such. But in the course of time, it's very interesting because mead actually is one of the best elixirs to age. Mead just gets better and better with age. And what happens when you have herbs that ferment in alcohol is different constituents of the plant, different effects are extracted by alcohol. There's many different forms of extraction methods, but the more magical properties of the herbs are actually embellished in a fermented alcoholic drink. And something happens in that passing of time where it becomes more than the sum of its parts. It's something altogether different. And sometimes usually the only way to get there is time. I just released a wassail brew, which is actually a really interesting brew. The wassails are the traditional European winter solstice drinks. And when I first brewed it, it tasted pretty horrendous for the first 4 or 5 months. And I thought, man, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. It might not be good. I might not work out for the best. I used wild grapes in combination with the honey, and I used some barley malt. And I allowed the wild grapes to be raw. So there were some levels of wild yeast or bacteria, as well as the yeast that I like to work with. And it was funky. But after 14 months of aging, and a lot of botanicals also were infused into the brew, it's one of the most exquisite brews I've ever tasted of mine. And it's so exciting. And I served it just last weekend at the soiree, and I really wasn't sure if their palates were going to be able to handle it, but it sold out. It was just, people were wild for it. And what's so interesting about this wassail is that it is actually an extremely ancient brew. It's honey. It's a combination of honey, grapes, and barley with a combination of botanical healing herbs. So that combination of more than, it's not just wine, it's not just beer, and it's not just mead, it's a combination of all three. This goes back at least 7,000 years, which you can trace throughout Europe, back to Turkey, to Phrygia, and they call them grogs. And with these herbal grogs, they were brewed in different strengths depending on what herbs they would use, whether they would be psychotropic or whether they would be, inebriating, just more mild. So it's a very ancestral drink.
Very old, very old.
It's very old.
And when I hearing you, I think that's a really beautiful avenue to kind of go further into sort of the old, what it means to work with old cultures and to be revitalizing culture. But before we get there, I want to just sort of pause at this kind of the different levels of time that I hear you talking about. I hear you talking about the revitalization of an old part of a culture, which has in itself a time dimension to it. Obviously, it's old. And so to be drinking something, to be drinking the contemporary variation of something very, very ancient is to participate in that ancient lineage itself. That's like one dynamic. And I think this is part of what it means to bring back sacrality and sacred culture, right? Is to name, find, revitalize, and literally bring back and remember, literally bring into our bodies again those multiple sensory configurations that our ancestors found helpful and enjoyed in various ways. So there's a part of actually doing the thing, which has been done for so long. Then there is this aspect of like at a given particular in the actual gathering of all of these 3 or 4 dimensions. The flower, the honey is all very fresh. The honey would have been I know you work with local honey, you work with local bees that are local to that particular area that you're making the brew, and you're not working with old honey, you're working with fresh honey. And so the honey itself and the herbs themselves are and the water itself is of a particular moment in time. And the capsule, it's like a time capsule that is being brewed into this configuration, is capturing that particular moment of time, which you frequently write about this and talk about it, is something that can never be redone. Like even if you use the same combination of herbs, the following year or a couple years later, if you use the same recipe, it is still of that moment, because each time that honey, that the bees are making the honey, they themselves are intersecting with the planet. And so in each thing that you're creating, and this is not just you, but anyone who's brewing, you are working with the immensely temporal, the ephemeral. That's the word I'm looking for, ephemeral. So you're looking for that. It's this immensely ephemeral quality to it that can only happen once, because that flower is only with you once as it is, even if the plant has been here for generations upon generations upon generations upon generations. That flower is only here once. And that becomes in a time capsule. But that in itself is changing as the brew itself deepens and develops. And so when you then taste the brew, you are tasting something that is alive at that present moment that you are tasting it, that was only possible because of that previous moment that it was gathered and synthesized, and because of that long tradition of brewing that precedes it. So there's at least 3 different, and then all of that is only possible through the cyclical passage of time. Yes. And so then it enables people to dip back and forth in time. I think that's part of the reason why it can be so powerful for helping us to dip into the past, to multiple dimensions of the past.
Yes. So well said. Yes. And I absolutely. And that's a big motivation for me in the work. It's a big motivation for why I release and have the soirees to release the brews on the equinoxes and solstices, because those are very powerful and holy moments of shift. They're very physiological. They're very practical.
Very planetary.
Very planetary. But there's a special energy of those times. In fact, I would say time, the quality of time changes in those spaces as it does under a full moon or a new moon, or the solstices. I mean, the root of solstice in Latin is still, right? The stillness. It's the still point within the cycle of growing light or ebbing light.
As our planet circles the sun.
And that's how seasons come to be, which is how we have plants in bloom or in fruit or in ferment or in and then when we create it with a sacred intention, that moment, that temporality is then put into the brew and preserved. We're preserving that energy of springtime, the blossoming of flowers, that very unique, delicious energy, unlike anything else. And then when we come back together the following year, we're able to drink of that time, the previous year. And I feel that it puts us into, and this is what I'd love to speak more with you about with your ceremony that you did. But it puts us in what I would say, like there's the circular time, and it puts us into the spiraling time space,
right?
Where we're accessing on a vertical axis.
Right, and this is so important for. I think let's clarify here that when you will create a brew around, say, the spring equinox or around the winter solstice, and then the idea of the Brewess Underground private club is that people come together and they gather for a soiree the following year at that location, more or less, where the brew was gathered and cultivated and has been sitting, and where, and then they're drinking the previous, spring equinoxes drink. Yeah,
that's the idea, and it doesn't have to be, quite that strict, but that's the gift of it. And even right. For example, at the autumn soiree, I had some herbs I had gathered, and we did a ceremony with everyone to put in their intentions. What were their joys in the harvest of the fall that they wanted to plant to grow, that they wanted to appreciate, and then brewed the herbs that had been infused with people's intentions into it, and then next fall be able to drink that.
And so then what's happened, and then part of what's happening there as people are doing that is that they get to experience the cycles. And you and I both talk about circular time, and to recognize that time is not a linear thing. The earth circles around the sun. And we can think of time probably most accurately in the more spiral or spherical nature, because we're not going around the same circle over and over again. And yet, on the one hand, we're not. And on the other hand, like we are experiencing, like the earth is circling the sun, even as the sun is circling the galaxy. And so right. we are orbits within orbits. And so there's this sort of continual spiral dimension. And unfortunately, most of us remain fixed on a linear calendar, which is part of why I teach and offer workshops and courses on circular time and circular calendars. And my partner and I developed a circular time ritual, which involves literally walking around a circle. We refer to it as becoming a time walker. And we initiated one at your soiree last summer solstice, as I mentioned. And so it was a wonderful moment we invited people to, walk into the circle, to walk backward in time, to experience that previous year, and to sip the elixir as part of this ritual to help take them back into that previous year. In this case, we were only working with a 1 year. We have worked with much bigger time frames. But within that past year, to kind of see what that elixir can open the consciousness into the times past as well as time present and our intention was, for greater healing.
I loved that.
It was amazing.
It was so wonderful and had such a power. The field was created and it had such a powerful effect. And I loved that you focused on us as we walked the wheel, remembering collective moments throughout the past year. But even in that space, even though you weren't calling in the multiple years, those dimensions of past and future felt present and accessible.
That's one of the things that we're learning right now, is that once we open that doorway and people walk in the circle, to become a time walker, to experience that in a ritual form, opens doorways to the past and the future. And we as the door openers, if you would, we can't predict which temporal dimension will show up. It's definitely been our experience with different people, different dimensions of time become real to them, and sometimes that's multiple generations, as well as the immediacy of the previous year. It's fluid. It's interesting the extent to which time is fluid. I very much consider us as students to time right now. We've had such a limited and, dare I say, square and narrow perspective of time. And our history and our culture suggests that time is so much more multidimensional.
Well, in modern culture, we're raised with the chronos time, with linear time, and we rely on it day in, day out because it's industrial. It's the time of capitalism, which is what dominates our world and our, much of our survival. So there's a lot of pressure to acclimate our beings to chronos time, to the linear time frame of the seconds and the minutes and the hours and the calendar, Gregorian calendar. But I really feel deeply that as beings, we are moving within, and we are of organic time or cyclical time, spiraling time, or kairos, and that there's a great deal of wisdom in kairos time, in the embodied organic rhythms of the living world, and that it's the home of intuition, the source, you could say that and that we're actually greatly influenced by the cycles of the living world of which we are, whether it's, we are cyclical beings, biologically, women's bodies, it's much harder to deny that, but no matter our genders, we're cyclical beings in many dimensions. And then the cycles of the seasons and the moon, which the seasons, the sun, affect us greatly, physiologically, but emotionally too, and spiritually. The dormancy of winter, the need for restfulness, to go into the darkness, the energy of springtime, the energy of high summer, the energy of the harvest, and the waning and the dying off and the cooling down. These affect us so directly, and yet collectively, we're also very affected by, in my belief, by the collective consciousness. And the collective consciousness of capitalism is a very hard one to release. As an artist, as a musician and an artist, I don't live in a 9-to-5 Monday through Friday reality, but I still feel the influence of a Monday morning. I still feel the difference of a Monday morning and a Sunday afternoon, and that's the collective. And I feel that with our seasonal celebrations, our holidays, the holiday season that we're in now. They fall now on arbitrary dates on the Gregorian calendar for the Western world, following the Christian traditions predominantly, which were influenced by the pre-Christian traditions of solstice. And solstice would have been dictated by the cycle of the sun, the living world. Instead, we're collectively celebrating the New Year and and Christmas and whatever we celebrate. Our official days off happen disjointed. More or less it works, but disjointed from what's going on. So for me, part of my work that inspires me is to create collective experiences of remembering and re-embodying, re-enchanting ourselves with this natural ebb and flow of cycles. So we can start to share together in that morphic field. Because collectively is where the power comes. Mm-hmm. It's where things come, most come to live. And we are creatures of habit. We're creatures of pattern. So for me, it's about supporting the repatterning of the wisdom, because I feel that there's a lot of latent wisdom in the living world, and that includes cyclical time.
I'm actually wondering if this would be a good moment for you to read this poem, the lyrics to a song that you wrote with one of your musical partners.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a song called Old Growth Fairytale, and it was written by Nicholas Moon and myself in our band called Wild Revival. Old Growth Fairytale, it goes. I swore to myself come last November, I was tired, I was through with this living all alone, slipping away through one box to another. Can you relate? I want to disconnect my phone. But I got a buzz from a springtime bloom. I'll call, I'll collect it back to the honeycomb. And I know a place that the grass adores me, and the wind gets heavy as she explores my skin. Fish grow tough in the battered sea. There's storms in the meadow. I guess that I'm a wildling. Tell me a dream that you had last summer. Don't wash it down the gutter. Your roots are in your hands. Moss grows thick in the uncut forest. She's pouring out courage back to the elven friends. And I know a place that the grass adores me, and the wind gets heavy as she explores my skin. Fish grow tough in the battered sea. There are storms in the meadow. I guess that I'm a wildling. I walked inside the labyrinth last Halloween. Heed the call, catch the train to the Highland Queen. Singing on the heath until the selkies cry. Just following that vision you felt in July. The roundhouse stands at the top of the hill. The Pictish thorn grows silent and still. Did you pick their berries? Did you drink their brew? Did you leave them there? They still wait for you. 3 nights by the fire, you're her daughter. She spins your dreams, sews up the seams. But you start to wonder about your desire, and your pain makes you run before the spell is done. But when you believed, you were flying high, and when you doubted, you started to die. And the children cry, believe, believe, believe. You've got everything you need. Take the hand through the ripple in time, trace the steps, sip the golden grail. I told myself I could never go back. The well froze over, no need to send the pail. Tell me again that dream when you were younger. Where did you go? What did you find out there? Lost for years to the hills of Norway, a night on the old Growth Fairytale.
That's so beautiful. It's beautiful to hear you read it. I'm wondering if you would indulge me and are you able to just sing that for us, like solo?
Oh, I could try. I'll sing my part.
Yeah, or sing the part that feels right now in this moment.
Walked inside the labyrinth last Halloween. Heed the call, catch the train to the Highland Queen. Singing on the heath until the selkies cry, just following that vision you felt in July. The roundhouse stands at the top of the hill. The Pictish thorn grows silent and still. Did you pick their berries? Did you drink their brew? Did you leave them there? They still wait for you. 3 nights by the fire, you're her daughter. She spins your dreams, sews up the seam. But you start to wonder about your desire. Your pain makes you run before the spell is done. When you believed you were flying high, and when you doubted, you started to die. And the children cry, believe, believe, believe. You've got everything you need. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that. That's so beautiful, especially since I didn't tell you beforehand.
I hope you get to hear the song with all the instrumentation and the harmonies. It's a lot of fun. But it's interesting. There's the old Growth Fairytale is in reference to time. It's in reference to fairy tale time.
Can you say something about fairy tale time?
Well, this is actually based, from Norway. Lost for years in the hills of Norway. A night on the old Growth Fairytale. This was inspired by a conversation that we were having with a dear friend, David Abram, author of Spell the Sensuous, who's so beautiful. And but even all throughout Europe, there's this idea that if one finds oneself deep in the woods and happens to fall suddenly into the dimension of the fairy, of the fae, they can stay for one night, even just one night in fairyland, which is, of course, the most extraordinary, delicious, indulgent, and wondrous experience one could ever have. They then might leave the following morning and come back to the human realm and realize that tens of years have gone by. Everyone that they know has passed away, that it's a different time. And that was just one night. And of course, that might be the real danger of exploring these, and the allure of exploring these spiritual realms, these magical realms, is that it is possible to go off far into those realms and get further away from the human realm.
It's both its potential and its danger. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's why something is wild. There's always danger involved in something that is powerful and wild by its nature. which is why we need ritual specialists to protect the gates, to hold the gates, and to facilitate sacred experience in timelessness, to lead us into timelessness and out of timelessness, because we are both creatures of time and creatures of timelessness. And we need experiences of both. And that's why the work that you do is so important.
Thank you.
And with brewing, I'll just add, with these sacred, powerful brews, some of which are and highly intoxicating in tradition and history, they were held by women predominantly. They were brewed by women predominantly, and they were, I want to say administered, but I don't think that's the right word. They were held in sacred ceremony. The priestesses were holding the space, creating the space for the ritual practice and the ritual use of the most potent of brews and elixirs. We know this of the Eleusinian mystery rites, for example, in Greece, in pre-Christian Greece. And oftentimes the priestesses were elder women, which we also often forget, because the older woman healer has become so defiled by Christianity and by the modern world, as being untrustworthy, an untrustworthy witch or sorceress, all of this defilement out of the need to strip her of her previous place of power, holding that sacred relationship. So for me, the reason why I call this work Brewess is in homage to the lineages of women brewers, healers, herbalists that were the wisdom keepers and creatrixes of these ancient healing traditions, to put this feminine herbalist healer back in her rightful place, an elder female healer, of being trustworthy and holding gates and being facilitators of the most sacred of experiences, of which childbirth is one.
Yes.
Birth, death, and all the initiations throughout life.
The gateways.
The gateways.
Yes, the gateways to multiple realms that we pass through, sometimes with different levels of intention and ritual.
That's right.
Yeah, it's as it's a sensory embodied dimension. It's something that I think can be, the teaching of it is something that one must have experientially done, not only
That's
thinking
right.
or talking about.
And that's why I just realized this actually, but why it's so important to practice entering consciously these gateways throughout the year. The solstice, the equinox, those are gateways into a different time, a different season, a different energetic reality. And yes, so we are practicing together and individually, making conscious the passage through these gateways.
Yeah.
So that we are more capable of when the more powerful or challenging gateways.
I really like that. And to understand how the seasons are shifting and to take note of how the flowers and plants are changing around us also increases our awareness of how we are changing and how our collective is changing. If we can see where doth go badger and beaver, are we not more able to also see where doth go our neighbor and our friend?
So beautiful.
Well, we are coming towards the end of our time, and for this time, and this particular fragmentation of time, and I am wondering if you could just leave our listeners with one or two, if there is a practice, and you actually might have already named it, but if there are one or two practices that they wanted to start, maybe they're already herbalists, maybe they're not, who want to engage more deeply with brewing and with cyclical time.
Yeah, with brewing and fermentation, I would recommend, there are many good books out there that can help lead the way, or with herbalism in general, to begin with creating direct relationships. So in whatever bioregion that you live in, look for the herbs in abundance, even ones that we can easily overlook. Cedar tips in the Northwest, Doug fir tips, these even salmonberry and blackberry leaves, the young leaves of blackberries are medicinal. So noticing that, and noticing what fruit or honey or what sweet source is available in your region. And then you can begin to experiment with fermenting herbal sodas or herbal brews of any kind. It doesn't have to be strong in alcohol. And in terms of practices with time, I feel like one of the most powerful things is what you're offering in learning how to create circles of time walkers. The ceremony that you did with me is it's deep and simple at the same, complex and simple at once. And it's something that I think that we have the remembrance of that in our bodies. So I know you're offering some training in that coming up, but I think that would be great. And what's helped me a lot is, of course, like having the moon calendar and knowing when the solstices and equinoxes are, and noticing what those cycles are, and giving ourselves time and space to participate in some way, whether that's personal or collective, bringing consciousness to that.
I would add to that, finding, even if it's just one other person to touch the earth with on the solstices and the equinoxes. And for those of you who also wish the cross holidays, and to see how those cross holidays line up with whatever other liturgical practices that is a part of your life, whether that be Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism, or just the movement of your community. How do they intersect with the local ecology? Not just the planets, but how does your faith tradition intersect with what's actually happening in your local ecosystem? And thinking about that. And that's also connected to something that I think Heather and you and I might talk about hopefully in the future, which is the multiplicity of engaging with the revitalization of folk traditions and the depth of it, the breadth of it. And also, how does that intersect with a local plants, local animals, and the local indigenous peoples and the traditions that that particular place has carried for generations upon generations upon generations? And how do we have this cross-cultural and cross-biocultural conversations and exchanges? I think that's a topic for another day, but there is much richness there, and all of these, all these questions are valuable. In our show notes, and songs, yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
Songs.
Sing songs, sing more songs, create more songs, learn more songs. Yes, indeed. So thank you so much. This has been absolutely delightful. Is there anything else that needs to be said before we close?
No, thank you. It's been a delight to explore these subjects with you.
All right.
Thank you.
We will give more information about Heather Wolf and how you can reach her and join her, the Brewess Underground. Thank you.
To myself come last November, I was tired, I was through with this living all alone. slipping away through one box to another. Can you relate? I wanna disconnect my phone, but I got a buzz from a springtime bloom. I'll call, I'll collect it back to the honeycomb. And I know a place where the grass adores me and the wind gets heavy as she explores my skin. Fish grow tough in the battered sea. There's storms in the meadow. I guess that I'm a wildling. Tell me a dream that you had last summer. Don't wash it down the gutter. Your roots are in your hands. Moss grows thick in the uncut forest. She's pouring out courage back to the elven friends. And I know a place where the grass adores me and the wind gets heavy. She explores my skin. Fish grow tough in the battered sea. There's storms in the meadow. I guess that I'm a wildling.
Walked inside the labyrinth last Halloween. Heed the call, catch the train to the Highland Queen. Singing on the heath until the selkies cried. Just following that vision you felt in July. The roundhouse stands at the top of the hill. The Pictish thorn grows silent and still. Did you pick their berries? Did you drink their brew? Did you leave them there? They still wait for you. 3 nights by the fire, you're her daughter. She spins your dreams, sews up the seams. But you start to wonder about your desire. Your pain makes you run before the spell is done. And when you believed you were flying high, and when you doubted, you started to die. And the children cry, believe, believe, believe. You've got everything you need. And the children cry, believe, believe, believe. You've got everything you need. Take the hand through the ripple in time. Trace the step, sip the golden grail. I told myself I could never go back. The well froze over, no need to send the bell. Tell me again that dream when you were younger. Where did you go? What did you find out there? Lost for years to the hills of Norway. A night on the old Growth Fairytale.
Thank you so much for listening to the Remembering and Re-Enchanting podcast. If you are enjoying what you are hearing, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. I am always happy to hear from you, dear listener, to continue finding ways to connect the disconnected and go deeper on your own journey of remembering and re-enchanting with your communities, your organizations, and your families. I invite you to check out our courses and other community offerings via the Sequoia Summit Via website. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Though I must admit I spend much more time working with really amazing people than crafting social media. If you want to work with me one-on-one or bring me to speak at your organization or family office, you can find out more at sarahjolina.com.